On a calm September night in 1989, at a convenience store along a lonely highway in North Florida, 36-year-old Darlene Messer vanished without a trace. 2 days later, a railroad conductor crossing a small bridge made a horrifying discovery. Darlene's crumpled body lay face down in the shallow water below. Her face had been beaten so savagely that identification was nearly impossible, and it was later determined that Darlene had been abducted from her workplace and brutally eliminated. This is the haunting story of what happened to Darlene Messer and the enduring mystery that continues to this day. Darlene was a 36-year-old mother originally from Calgary in Canada. In 1987, she moved to Florida to be near a prison pen pal, Charles Messer, who would soon become her husband. Charles was imprisoned for slaying an individual during a robbery and was actually scheduled to get the big state-sponsored DP. According to those who knew Darlene, she knew about the nature of his criminal offenses, but she had been led to believe that he was going to get paroled. I'm guessing she didn't know too much about Florida justice, but hey, it was the 80s. By that year, Darlene was living in Lake City and working the overnight shift at a convenience store. Her mother was visiting from Canada at the time, completely unaware of the tragedy about to unfold. Late on September 18, 1989, Darlene was behind the counter on her usual graveyard shift. Shortly after midnight, a couple from Georgia stopped in around 12:35 for coffee and snacks. They stayed for about 15 minutes, and as they left, they nearly collided with an incoming vehicle, an older rust-colored Pontiac Grand Prix. This was the last car seen at the store before everything went wrong. At about 12:55 a.m., minutes after that mystery car arrived, the store's silent alarm went off. Police rushed to the scene and found the place empty and chaotic. Around $100 was missing from the register, and money and goods were strewn across the floor, and Darlene was gone. She was packing a Roscoe in her purse, but it appeared that the weapon was simply too far away from her. This suggested that this was a violent and sudden abduction. A frantic search began for the missing clerk almost immediately, with her mother attempting to help in any way she could. 2 days later, on September 20th, a train conductor passing over a bridge about 13 miles from the store spotted a body in the shallow water below. Authorities found Darlene lying face down in water under the bridge. She was fully clothed but missing one shoe, as well as a necklace and an earring. These are items that were potentially lost in the struggle, or potentially dark souvenirs taken by the predator. She had been beaten, possibly with a hammer, and the blows to her face were so severe she was almost unrecognizable. I don't usually get into the gruesome details, but here it's important since some have suggested that this hints at a personal grudge against Darlene. And keep that in mind, because there were two men who definitely had some serious hatred of her, but I'll get to that in a moment. Evidence on the bridge indicated she was probably eliminated there and her body thrown into the creek afterward. Investigators also noted an oil stain on the bridge, possibly left by the perp's vehicle. Detectives began piecing together leads. The couple who last saw Darlene described the car they encountered, but they couldn't see the driver. 10 days before the slaying, Darlene had reported two suspicious men lurking around the convenience store's parking lot. Police responded and arrested the pair, who were armed. These men, known as Bob and Roger, were former co-workers of Darlene's. She had even reported them for theft at a previous job, suggesting a grudge. When they were arrested, Bob and Roger were driving a rust-colored Grand Prix that leaked oil, eerily similar to the car and clues in Darlene's case. Further, the very personal way in which Darlene was eliminated by the perpetrator or perpetrators does suggest a grudge may have been at play, and Bob and Roger definitely had one. Investigators focused on these two men and both denied involvement and claimed they were nowhere near Lake City that night. Ultimately, forensic evidence at the scene suggested they weren't solely responsible. That said, the authorities have speculated that they may have had help from another man, explaining why the forensic situation doesn't line up neatly, and they've never been cleared. Another lead pointed to a 31-year-old man arrested in Gainesville for a string of convenience store robberies around that time. A witness had reported seeing a blue car with a woman screaming near Lake City on the night Darlene disappeared, and this suspect drove a blue car. He also had a violent past, and his own wife reportedly made statements implicating him. Police impounded his vehicle, but found nothing to tie him to Darlene's abduction. Given Darlene's unusual personal life, detectives considered her husband as well. Charles Messer was in prison at the time, and some speculated he orchestrated an attack from prison out of jealousy. This theory never gained traction, and police found no evidence for it, and believed Charles had no role in his wife's death. Others have speculated that her connection to Messer may have made her a target. Under this line of reasoning, she may have been targeted by someone who Messer wronged, either in his criminal career or inside prison. Ultimately, however, there's no proof of this, despite how intriguing the theory may be. Three little girls went on what appeared to be a camping trip with their dad, but in a disturbing twist, they never came home. That father's three young daughters were found deceased at a remote campground in Washington's Cascade Mountains, and the father himself missing. In early June 2025, authorities in Washington state discovered the bodies of 9-year-old Peyton, 8-year-old Evelyn, and 5-year-old Olivia Decker. They were found near the Rock Island campground in the Okanogan-Wenatchee National Forest. The girls had been reported missing 3 days earlier after their father, 32-year-old Travis Decker, failed to return them to their mother following a court-ordered visitation. A sheriff's deputy searching the area made the grim find. The sisters were in and around Decker's parked pickup truck, their small wrists bound with zip ties and plastic bags tied over their heads. This horrific scene left no doubt what had happened, and investigators quickly determined the man responsible was their father. The discovery of the children's bodies immediately set off an intensive manhunt for their missing father. Decker, an Army veteran with survival training, was nowhere to be found at the campsite. His white truck was abandoned at the scene, and scattered nearby were disturbing clues. There were remnants of plastic bags and zip ties, and what appeared to be bloody handprints on the truck's tailgate. Travis Decker had been a familiar presence in his daughters' lives. He was an Army veteran, but in civilian life he struggled with severe post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental health issues. Family accounts described him waking from nightmares and barely sleeping due to this trauma. These struggles strained his 10-year marriage to Whitney Decker, which ended in 2022. Afterward, Whitney was granted full custody of the girls due to the instability of the father. Given concerns about Travis's mental stability, a court restricted his parenting time to short daytime visits in the Wenatchee area with no overnight stays. He was supposed to seek counseling and undergo a psychiatric evaluation, conditions he did not fulfill. Despite his personal decline, by 2025, he was effectively homeless and unemployed. Everyone believed he was loved and adored his children. No one imagined that the scheduled visitation on May 30th, 2025 would end in unspeakable tragedy. In fact, just 3 days before the girls went missing, Decker had been involved in a minor car accident and was cited by police. Records indicated that his behavior was odd and belligerent during this time. He was also noted to be behaving unusually at work in the weeks prior to the event. These were small incidents that in hindsight foreshadowed the extreme turmoil to come. On May 30th, 2025, Travis Decker picked up Peyton, Evelyn, and Olivia from their mother for what was supposed to be a routine visit. He even told his ex-wife he would have the girls home by 8 that evening. But that night, he never showed up, and Whitney Decker's calls to him went straight to voicemail. By late evening, she contacted police, alarmed that Travis had disappeared with the children. Over the next 2 days, authorities treated the situation as an endangered missing persons case. Travis had no fixed residence and could have taken the girls to any campground or motel. An alert was broadcast statewide, and police and family frantically searched for the trio. In hindsight, evidence suggests Travis may have been planning an escape. Investigators later discovered that just days before the slayings, he had Googled how to move to Canada. Whether he intended to flee with the girls or alone remains unknown, but the timing of those searches hints at premeditation. On June 2nd, 2025, the mystery turned into horror. That afternoon, deputies found Decker's pickup truck parked at a remote campsite near Leavenworth, and near it they discovered the bodies of Peyton, Evelyn, and Olivia. For law enforcement, finding Travis Decker became a daunting challenge. As a former soldier with survival skills, he was believed capable of living off the land for an extended time. The area around the campground is remote and rugged, steep mountain foothills blanketed in dense forest where a person could easily slip out of sight. Within days of the slayings, a multi-agency manhunt mobilized. The Chelan County Sheriff's Office coordinated with the FBI, the Marshal Service, the Washington State Patrol, and other local agencies to scour the wilderness for any sign of Decker. Teams used tracking dogs and cadaver dogs to sniff through the woods, while helicopters and drones scanned from above. Ground searchers trekked through thick brush, along riverbanks, and up ravines, contending with dangerous terrain and scant cell phone service. Authorities circulated wanted posters with Decker's photo widely in the area where he might be. They also released digitally altered images, showing how he might change his appearance by shaving his head or beard to avoid recognition. In the first week, a few leads emerged but ultimately led nowhere. A reported sighting of Decker in Idaho on June 4th was investigated and quickly written off as a case of mistaken identity. Search teams at one point found footprints and other indications in the Blewett Pass area of Washington, but those clues didn't result in a capture. Frustratingly, every promising trail seemed to go cold. As the manhunt stretched into late summer, authorities intensified their efforts near the scene of the crime. On August 25, 2025, the FBI led a large-scale operation to re-sweep the vicinity of Rock Island Campground with fresh resources. About 100 personnel, including FBI agents, tactical teams, and forensic specialists, conducted a meticulous grid search of a quarter-mile radius around the campground. Trails and campsites were temporarily closed to the public as searchers bushwhacked through undergrowth. Despite this exhaustive 2-day effort, no trace of Decker was found. Officials stressed that there had been no break in the case, and they still had no evidence indicating whether Decker is alive or dead. One sheriff noted that if Decker is out there, he has to remain lucky every single day, whereas the authorities only have to be successful once to finally catch him. In other words, one mistake by the fugitive, or one lucky break for authorities, could finally end the manhunt. Not all experts believe Decker can evade capture indefinitely. One law enforcement analyst pointed out that since search dogs haven't picked up any scent of a body, this suggests he likely hasn't died in the woods. This expert believes Decker is probably still on the move and will eventually have to come out of hiding to seek shelter or food. According to this theory, given the national attention on the case, at that point he's most vulnerable to being taken into custody. On the other hand, investigators cannot rule out that Decker somehow slipped out of the region entirely. Decker had been researching how to get into Canada, and many speculate he may be holed up in the Great White North as we speak. Security is extremely lax along this border, and large stretches are essentially minimally patrolled tracts of vast wilderness. He may be hiding out in the interior of the province of British Columbia, or he may be making for the truly wild north. Some have speculated that he could be planning on setting up an outpost in the Yukon Territory or the Northwest Territories. To put this in perspective, the Yukon and the Northwest Territories combined are almost triple the size of Texas and are virtually unpopulated. At present, the manhunt for Travis Decker remains ongoing. If you have any information about this active and ongoing investigation, please contact the U.S. Marshal Service or the FBI or the local sheriff's office. The authorities have warned anyone who sees this man not to approach him or attempt to apprehend him, as he is considered armed and extremely dangerous. Personally, I have some serious doubts that this guy is alive after he fully processed the profoundly evil acts he committed against the three people who loved and trusted him most. Hey everyone, Jimmy here with a reminder to like and subscribe, and also click the share button and spread the love. Also, I've just launched the Lazy Chill History podcast, where I'm slowly rolling out all my content from my history channel. I've included the link in the description, so do me a huge favor and check it out and follow me over there as well. On a cold December afternoon in 1992, 23-year-old Stephen Clark walked into a public washroom by the seaside and was never seen again. The quaint coastal village of Marske by the Sea in northern England would become the center of a decades-long mystery after Stephen vanished without a trace. What began as a routine holiday walk with his mother turned into one of the UK's most perplexing missing person cases. Over 30 years later, Stephen's fate remains unknown, leaving his family and an entire community desperate for answers. Stephen Clark was born in 1969 and grew up in a loving family alongside his parents, Doris and Charles, and a younger sister, Victoria. As a child, he survived a terrible accident where he was struck by a vehicle, an event that left him with serious injuries to his left arm and leg. The damage was permanent. Stephen's left arm was largely unusable, and he walked with a pronounced limp for the rest of his life. Despite the challenges stemming from his childhood injuries, Stephen was determined to build an independent life. In his late teens, his family had spent several years in South Africa before returning to England in 1990, eventually settling in Marske by the Sea. Eager to improve his prospects, he enrolled in a training program with an organization supporting people with disabilities in developing job skills. During this time, Stephen also began dating a young woman he met through the program. He grew close enough to be invited to her home to meet her parents, a sign that the relationship was becoming meaningful. By the winter of 1992, it seemed that Stephen was on the verge of big things in both his personal and professional life. As Christmas came and went that year, none of his loved ones could have imagined that Stephen's promising life was about to take a tragic turn. The incident occurred on Monday, December 28, 1992, just after Christmas. Stephen and his mother Doris decided to take an afternoon walk along the beach from their village of Marske to the nearby town of Saltburn by the Sea. The seaside promenade was a familiar spot and an easy outing for the 23-year-old and his mom. At approximately 3 o'clock that afternoon, as they strolled near Saltburn's pier, Stephen told his mother he needed to use the washroom. He headed for the public toilet while Doris went into the adjacent ladies' facilities at the same time. That brief moment, a mother and son entering separate bathrooms, would be the last time Doris ever saw her son. Stephen had vanished in a matter of minutes, in a busy area, with no witnesses whatsoever. Alarmed and confused, Doris searched the immediate area but found no sign of Stephen. It was as if he had evaporated into thin air. When he failed to turn up, Stephen's family contacted police to report him missing. The initial search for Stephen focused on the coastline and town where he was last seen. Given the proximity to the sea, there was concern he might have had an accident, perhaps fallen from the nearby pier or cliffs, or been caught by the tide. However, extensive searches of the shoreline and surrounding area turned up nothing. No clothing, no clues, and, most importantly, no body was ever found. Stephen seemed to have disappeared without a trace, leaving behind countless unanswered questions. Adding to the mystery, it was later noted that Stephen had left some personal items back home that day, including his wallet, watch, and glasses. These are items he would almost certainly need if he planned on going anywhere for long. These possessions sitting untouched in his bedroom suggested that he fully expected to return home shortly, a return that never happened. For years, the last confirmed sighting of Stephen remained that fateful moment at the Saltburn public toilets. His family was left in limbo, and Doris and Charles insisted their son was happy and had no reason to run away. The idea that he might have done something or simply left to start a new life didn't square with his personality or circumstances. Stephen had been looking forward to things like a potential job opportunity and his budding romance, making a voluntary disappearance seem improbable. Still, without any evidence of foul play, police initially treated the case as a missing person inquiry. The trail in Saltburn went cold, and as the 1990s progressed, Stephen's case languished with no breakthroughs. Then, in 2020, this long-dormant case was suddenly thrust back into the spotlight. The cold case unit took a fresh look at the file and uncovered new information that raised disturbing possibilities. In particular, detectives revealed that a potential witness had come forward with a significant new sighting. A woman reported seeing a man she believed to be Stephen near the Clark family's home in Marsk on the very day he went missing. She recalled this as being sometime between 3 and 4 that afternoon, on December 28, 1992. And yeah, that's quite a memory on her, recalling the exact time and date she saw someone almost 30 years ago. I can't even remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. But to spoil what happens next, this is going to be part of the basis for charging the parents, but I'll come to that. If accurate, this sighting meant that Stephen did make it back from Saltburn that afternoon. This would contradict the long-held assumption that whatever happened to him occurred at the seaside toilets. Police stated that they found the report credible and now believe Stephen was alive and in the vicinity of his home during that hour on the day he vanished. This revelation shifted the focus of the investigation dramatically and hinted that the original timeline of events might be incomplete. Even more startling was an old clue resurrected from the past. Back in 1999, 7 years after Stephen disappeared, an anonymous letter had been mailed to the local police station. The unsigned letter claimed that Stephen Clark was dead, and even named a specific person responsible for his death. At the time, officers had logged the letter and discussed its contents with Stephen's family, but with no corroborating evidence, the lead went nowhere and faded into obscurity. Now, with the case reopened, detectives made a public appeal in 2020 for the mystery letter writer to come forward. In a surprising turn, the author of the letter did come forward after that appeal and spoke with police as part of the investigation. Authorities haven't disclosed what was learned, but the letter's emergence was one of several factors that convinced investigators something criminal might have happened to Stephen. By late 2020, the Cold Case Review had gathered enough evidence and suspicion for the authorities to take drastic action. Citing the total absence of any proof of life for nearly 30 years, detectives formally declared that Stephen was likely slain. But then things took a very dramatic and unexpected turn. In September 2020, in a bombshell development that made national headlines in the UK, Stephen's elderly parents, Doris and Charles Clark, were arrested for the crime. The notion that his own mother and father, now in their late 70s, could be implicated in Stephen's fate shocked those who knew the close-knit family. Police spent days searching the Clark home, digging up sections of the yard and combing through decades-old belongings for any hidden evidence. The investigation into Stephen's relationships and last known activities took on new urgency as detectives tried to determine if there had been foul play from within the household. After months of scrutiny, however, the case against Doris and Charles didn't materialize. In early 2021, the Crown Prosecution Service announced no charges would be filed due to insufficient evidence. The Clarks were fully cleared and released, and ultimately it remains unclear why the authorities figured that this would be an appropriate charge in the circumstances. Both parents vehemently maintained their innocence throughout, calling the ordeal horrendous, and professing that they had no idea what happened to Stephen. In fact, in the wake of their arrest, the couple took the unusual step of inviting a television documentary crew into their lives. They hoped that this would both clear their names and also raise the profile of their son's case. They may have also been hoping to put some serious pressure on the authorities to actually crack the case given the spectacle that was created with the arrest. However, by the end of 2021, the active investigation wound down again with no arrests, no answers, and a cloud of suspicion dispelled, but not fully understood. Over the years, Stephen Clark's case has spawned many theories, each troubling in its own way, and none supported by definitive evidence. One early theory was that Stephen might have suffered an accident by the sea, such as slipping on ice or being swept away by waves near the pier. However, an extensive search never found any trace of him along the coast, and the geography of the region isn't particularly treacherous. Another possibility raised was that Stephen chose to disappear intentionally, perhaps to start a new life. Yet those close to him argue this is out of character, and Stephen left behind his essential belongings and also was looking forward to upcoming opportunities. This makes it hard to believe he would simply walk away forever, especially since he seems to have been so excited about his new girlfriend and the potential future with her. There's also the grim scenario of a random attacker or abduction. No witnesses have ever come forward to suggest an attack in that busy area, and Stephen, at 6 feet 3 inches, isn't the sort of person predators generally choose to target. Even though he had a visible physical disability due to the accident, he would have still been able to give a hell of a fight. The most persistent theory, and the one pursued by police in 2020, is that foul play by someone close to Stephen led to his disappearance. Investigators scrutinized Stephen's inner circle, including family, because statistically, a person is often harmed by someone they know. The anonymous letter from 1999 had explicitly pointed to an unnamed individual's involvement, implying that Stephen was slain and the truth covered up. Ultimately, however, at present, all we can say is that his parents have been investigated thoroughly and cleared. As of today, the disappearance of Stephen Clark remains an agonizing, unsolved mystery. It's now been more than 3 decades since that December day, and Stephen's 53rd birthday has come and gone with no answers. His story continues to haunt the community of Marsk by the Sea, where by all accounts he was a familiar and well-liked figure. His parents, against all hope, have publicly stated that they continue to hope that one day he'll simply just walk through the door once again. Imagine walking alone on a misty mountain path in rural Japan. All is quiet until a strange, hunched figure emerges from the trees. Before you can even cry out, the creature speaks, and it's your voice, uttering the very thought that was forming in your mind. Such is the unnerving encounter with the Satori, a mysterious being of Japanese folklore said to read minds. In Japanese lore, the Satori is described as a monkey-like supernatural creature that dwells in remote mountain regions. Travelers trekking along lonely mountain paths or woodcutters working at isolated forest huts may encounter a Satori suddenly appearing on the trail. With its hunched, hairy form and unnervingly keen eyes, the creature's mere appearance is frightening, yet the Satori's most dreaded ability is even more unsettling. The hallmark of a Satori is its telepathic power to read human thoughts. It will instantly speak a person's thoughts aloud, often finishing your sentences before you do. This means the creature can anticipate every action. If you plan to run or to strike it, the Satori already knows, making it nearly impossible to catch by surprise. This psychological terror of having one's private thoughts exposed by a monster makes the Satori especially feared. Beyond its mind reading, the Satori is also known as a dangerous predator. Legends claim it will hunt humans for sport. However, folklore offers a clever defense against this menace. If a person can manage to do something truly unexpected, an action with no premeditation, it might startle the Satori and send it fleeing in fear. Better yet, the surefire way to survive a Satori encounter is to empty one's mind completely. With no thoughts to read, the mind-reading monster becomes confused or bored, and eventually wanders off. Of course, achieving such a zen-like state of no mind while facing a hungry cryptid is easier said than done, which is why most victims in the tales are not so lucky. The Satori's very name hints at its eerie role. In Japanese, Satori refers to sudden enlightenment, an ironic title for a wild mountain monster. Even the prescribed escape from a Satori, clearing one's mind entirely, mirrors Zen Buddhist practices of attaining inner stillness. In this way, the Satori legend doubles as a folk cautionary tale and a subtle spiritual lesson about the power of the ability to empty one's mind. Historically, the Satori entered written folklore during the Edo period, with the first documented recording of the creature coming in a 1712 encyclopedia. Folklorists have offered various interpretations of what the Satori really represents. One theory is that it started out as a mountain kami, a minor deity or spirit of the wild, that devolved into a yokai as people lost faith in the old nature gods. Another theory is that the creature grew out of a previous ghostly entity, which was said to haunt mountains and echo words back. For clarity's sake, a yokai is a supernatural entity from Japanese folklore, often described as spirits, demons, strange apparitions, or in modern times, as cryptids. They embody the mysterious, eerie, and sometimes playful aspects of the unseen world. Many interpretations of this creature are interwoven with Zen Buddhist lessons, and the stories may not be intended to be taken at face value. One of the most famous Satori legends tells of a lone woodcutter deep in the mountains who is stalked by the creature. Every time the woodcutter conceives a plan, whether to flee or to swing his axe, the Satori speaks his thought aloud in a mocking voice, thwarting any chance of surprise. Finally, in desperation, the man stops scheming and simply resumes chopping wood, trying to empty his mind. While he chops the wood, eventually the axe head breaks off and flies into the Satori, eliminating the ape creature on the spot. The tale's implicit moral is that only a truly empty mind can outwit the mind-reading Satori, mirroring the Zen teaching that stillness of mind can overcome even great obstacles. Folk traditions are generally less high-minded, and simply focus on the fact that the Satori wouldn't harm those who live and work respectfully in the mountains. In these stories, the creature preys mainly on outsiders or people who look to exploit the mountain's riches, almost like a guardian spirit of the highlands, enforcing nature's rules. While the Satori is now largely regarded solely as a mythical being, this creature was once accepted as part of the order of the natural world. Interestingly, some have tried to tie the Satori to the case of the Hibagon, an ape-like cryptid which was reported in Japan in the 1970s. Notably, though, aside from both being ape-like creatures residing in the mountains, the two really have nothing in common at all. Medieval kings often left behind illegitimate children, but few are as enigmatic as Philip of Cognac. Philip was the only acknowledged illegitimate son of King Richard I of England, better known as Richard the Lionheart, and yet we know remarkably little about him. In particular, the identity of Philip's mother remains an unsolved mystery. Historians have scoured chronicles and records, but no contemporary source names the woman who bore Richard's son. This silence has fueled centuries of speculation and intrigue. Who was she, and why has history forgotten her? But that's not the only mystery that surrounds him, for there are tantalizing clues to suggest that he actually personally hunted down the man responsible for his father's death. Philip of Cognac was recorded as being born around 1180 and had the distinction of being the only known child, either legitimate or illegitimate, of Richard. He grew up during Richard's tumultuous reign, reaching adulthood by the late 1190s. His name of Cognac comes from the lordship of Cognac in the Charente region of France, a territory that became intertwined with his fate. Richard the Lionheart, famous for his exploits on crusade and in warfare, surprisingly took time to secure a future for Philip. The king arranged a marriage between Philip and Amelia of Cognac, a noble heiress and Richard's feudal ward. By marrying Amelia, Philip stood to inherit the castle and surrounding estates of Cognac, firmly rooting him in the political landscape of Richard's Duchy of Aquitaine. This was a strategic match orchestrated by Richard. Amelia's father, Ethier V, had been Lord of Cognac, and through her, Philip could claim that valuable estate. It appears Richard wanted to provide for his son, perhaps as a loyal vassal in Aquitaine, even though Philip could never inherit the English throne due to his illegitimacy. Unfortunately, the plans didn't fully pan out, to say the least. Amelia of Cognac died young, reportedly in 1199, and the couple had no children. After her death, King Richard retained the castle of Cognac, ultimately granting it to lesser noblemen in his service. Philip's brief taste of lordship ended as quickly as it began. Nevertheless, Philip of Cognac did make a mark on the chronicles, however faint. One chronicle by Roger of Howden claims that in 1199, after Richard was slain in battle, Philip avenged his father's death by hunting down the Viscount of Limoges. According to this, Aymar V, the rebellious Viscount, ultimately responsible for Richard's fatal wound, was brought down by his vengeful son, Philip. Howden wrote, Philip, illegitimate son of King Richard of England, slew the Viscount of Limoges in vengeance for his father. No other source confirms this dramatic episode. It may be only a legend. But it shows that Philip's contemporaries knew who he was. In fact, even King John, Richard's brother and successor, noted Philip's status. A 1201 royal account book cites a significant gift to Philip, son of King Richard. After that, Philip of Cognac disappears from the records. Some have suggested he likely died sometime in the early 13th century, still a young man. That said, the ultimate fate of Richard the Lionheart's only acknowledged son remains a complete mystery. All these details paint the outline of Philip's life: a youth in Aquitaine, a politically arranged marriage, a fleeting role in the violent drama of his father's demise, and then obscurity. Yet, amid these facts, one glaring question remains unanswered. Who was Philip's mother? Every mention of Philip carefully omits her name, referring to her only implicitly, if at all. To understand why Philip's mother might be missing from the record, it helps to look at Richard the Lionheart's personal life and attitudes. Unlike many kings of his era, or any era really, Richard had no legitimate children, and only one illegitimate child. He married relatively late, at age 34, to Queen Berengaria of Navarra. That marriage produced no offspring, and husband and wife spent much of their time apart. Richard was, of course, famous for his significant time spent abroad fighting in the Holy Land. This lack of an heir was a significant issue. Richard's absence of children meant that when he died in 1199, the crown passed to his brother John. Richard's father, Henry II, had numerous acknowledged illegitimate offspring, but Richard's case was very different. All evidence indicates that Philip's mother was simply never officially identified. Medieval chroniclers usually mentioned an illegitimate child's mother only if she was notable in her own right, for instance, a high-ranking noble. In Philip's case, every record is silent on her name and background, implying she was not of high rank or political importance. Roger of Howden, who detailed Philip's supposed act of vengeance, likewise gives no hint of maternal lineage. This lack of reference to his maternal line is sometimes used as evidence in support of the act of vengeance against the Viscount by Philip. After all, if the account was entirely fictional, why not invent a fictional maternal lineage to make the young man seem destined for heroism? Even administrative records, like that 1201 pipe roll entry from King John, acknowledge Philip while keeping his mother anonymous. This anonymity could be deliberate. It's possible that Philip's mother was a commoner or lower status noblewoman, whose liaison with Richard was a private matter. If she were a married woman or a daughter of one of Richard's vassals, there may have been a desire to keep the affair discreet to avoid scandal. However, some have speculated that by keeping her name out of official records, he kept the focus on Philip as his son, and only that. So with all the facts laid out, who could she have been? Based on Philip's estimated birth, circa 1180, Richard would have been about 22 or 23 years old at the time. Richard spent those years in Aquitaine, ruling as duke and quelling uprisings among his barons. It stands to reason that Philip's mother was a woman Richard knew in Aquitaine during that period. She might have been from the Cognac region or elsewhere in Poitou. Another possibility often floated is that Philip's mother was one of the unnamed women mentioned in tales of Richard's wartime cruelty. Some have suggested that, to put it mildly, Philip's mother was not there of her own accord. Such an origin would be all the more reason not to publicize the mother's name. If the mother was from a noble family, they would hardly want it known what had happened, especially if they were subsequently vassals of Richard. If she was a common woman, such an event would portray Richard, the supposedly pious crusader king, as a monster, ruthlessly exploiting those he ruled over in the most cruel and evil way. Whatever the case, the true fate of the only known son of Richard the Lionheart, as well as the identity of his mother, remains concealed by the mists of history. Perhaps the most controversial theory is that Philip wasn't actually Richard's son at all. As I mentioned previously, kings of this era got around. That is to say, they got busy, consistently and thoroughly. Some in the Angevin court and around the high courts of Europe started to question whether Richard preferred the company of men. After all, kings of the era routinely produced innumerable offspring, and something just wasn't adding up. Under this theory, Philip's mother may have been concealed to cover up the fact that Richard either wasn't the father or simply didn't enjoy the process as a king should. Keeping the mother's name under wraps would allow this royal secret to be covered up. However, it's important to note that this is essentially a 12th century rumor that's made it to the present, and there's no direct evidence to indicate this was the case.